let's back up a little bit. What spawned your interest in digital rights and tech policy? Like where did that initiate for you just in your life?
Well, in some ways, it comes from the same place as my interest in science fiction, um, which is that I grew up in a household uh, where the things that our household revolved around were technology, because my dad was a computer scientist and my mom was an early childhood educator with a strong interest in how digital systems could help teach young children, and also politics and human rights. So my parents were union organizers, they were anti-nuclear proliferation organizers, they were feminist organizers. My mom was instrumental in the fight to legalize abortion in Canada, and they were also, both of them, very interested in how human rights intersected with technology. And then, my dad especially, but my mom also, were really into technological speculation, speculative fiction, and the idea that you could, in the act of speculation itself, do something radical. If you think about Margaret Thatcher and the neoliberal project of the kind of Thatcher, Reagan, Mulroney era, her rallying cry was, there is no alternative, right? Like, on the one hand, she wanted you to imagine a world in which everything was commodified and organized around markets, and everything was bought and sold, and there was nothing that was owned in common or provided in common. But on the other hand, she wanted you not to try to imagine anything else. So I've been trying to come up with like a non-jargony name for this, but the jargony name that, if you were like a theorist, you would call this, is hegemonic and anti-hegemonic imagination. So hegemonic imagination is to imagine one thing and nothing else, to insist on a kind of inevitablism. This is like the Vogons in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Resistance is futile, or the motto over the motto that over the gates of hell that Dante put there in the Divine Comedy, which was, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. Right? Like, nothing will change. This is the only way it can be. We are at the end of history. This is human nature. It's built in. It can't be changed. These are unalterable facts. If you say anything different, you are engaged in fantasy and not in speculation or scenario building. And so that's hegemonic narrative. Counter hegemonic narrative is, there's always an alternative, right? Like, anything can be anything. We could do something a different way. We could organize our society around a completely different set of principles. And, there's a book by a sadly departed friend of mine, David Graeber, that he
Mm.
wrote with David Wengrow. Graeber was an anthropologist, Wengrow's an archaeologist, called The Dawn of Everything, which explores the latest science about prehistory and what we know about prehistory. And there's a story about prehistory that's really dominant, that says that, like, first we were hunter gatherers and we lived in small groups, and we had a lot of autonomy. And then we invented agriculture and we had to settle down, and we created hierarchical societies that expropriated the surplus from agriculture, but also created like science and stuff, because there were like people who could like beat up anyone who wouldn't share their food, and then didn't have to work in the fields, and they could just sit around and like write poetry and think about science. And that this is like this inevitable way that we go. And when you actually look at the ruins of ancient civilizations, you see evidence of like every conceivable way of organizing yourself. You see super authoritarian hunter-gatherer tribes. You see giant cities that had no housing for bureaucrats or lords, right? So like, that were seemingly totally self-organizing and egalitarian. And you see everything in between, right? Big distributed authoritarian societies, big concentrated anti-authoritarian societies, all of it. Which is to say that like, everything is possible, right? The science fiction idea of like, what if only, if this goes on, the idea that you can always contest the narrative, right? That we choose what society we're going to live in, and that it's not down to human nature or the foundational characteristics of our technology or whatever. that, within that constraints of who we are and how long we live and what we need to survive and what we know how to do, that we can organize those things in any way. We can choose to use technologies, not to use technologies. We can choose to organize the technologies in different ways. The Luddites get this rap as being like technophobes. The Luddites, who were like the textile workers who rose up against the automated textile machinery, they took 7-year apprenticeships using the most advanced technology of their day. These were people who had the equivalent of like an MIT master's in engineering. And what they objected to, it wasn't like they were scared of steam looms, right? They were angry that their bosses, first of all, wanted to make bad textiles because the product that came off of them was bad, and that the machines were, quote, so simple a child could use them, and that what their bosses wanted to do was fire their asses, go to London, where there were these orphanages full of children whose parents had died in the Napoleonic Wars, kidnap those children to the English North, where they were industrializing, and lock them inside the factory for 10-year indentures, where they would be maimed and killed and starved and beaten by these machines. And, their point wasn't like, we shouldn't have textile machines. Their point was, there is nothing inevitable about chaining children to textile machines for 10 years and having the floor run with their blood, right? That like what's important is not what the machine does, but who it does it for and who it does it to. So, when you combine this technological upbringing with this policy upbringing, with this imaginative upbringing, and this idea that imagination is a force for liberation, that like I kind of landed exactly where I was gonna.